protecting your health. Sorry, I couldn't resist, but I think a lot of times we might be getting sick of talking about COVID. But I don't think anything's more important right now. I mean, if you think about it, our number one and two leading causes of death are all obviously like heart disease and cancer. If you look statistically, our number three leading cause of death is medicine, but these are the people that are actually leading the charge to try to save your life. And I think that what we have to do is get a little bit smarter. And the biggest thing that I'm seeing that's a problem is people are talking about we got to follow the science, and if you're not following the science, then you're just a hack, you're an idiot, you're an anti-vaxxer, you're like a space alien. The problem is that it really depends on what science you're looking at. If you get to cherry pick your science, then you can make science say anything. If you get to tweak your statistics, or if you're not even keeping track of things, you'll find that then you don't have to answer any questions. And so I think the interesting thing is for me is that COVID pandemic has really spurred this remarkable stream of scientific investigation. But that knowledge isn't really translating to better public policy right now. I think, obviously with the zealous pursuit of public mask wearing, and this really is a measure at best that has had modest effect on viral transmission, or I think take the lockdowns that were shown by research to actually increase deaths overall, but nonetheless they still were considered an acceptable solution. The vaccinating the children, where almost more children died from gunshots, or more kids have been shot by guns in Chicago during this time, and more kids have died from increase in suicides than actually have died from COVID, and more people actually died from drug overdoses in San Francisco than died from COVID. So we forget about perspective, and I think there's this intellectual disconnect now that extends to the COVID-19 vaccine mandates, and this is just my opinion. But it's also based on fact. It's based on the facts that are out there. And I think the really big problem is that the policy is promoted as like essential for stopping the spread of COVID-19. The problem is that the evidence just doesn't suggest it. It doesn't support that. I mean, the real common argument for the vaccine mandates is that you have no right to infect me, but cases they're driven by asymptomatic, pre-symptomatic people who are completely unaware that they're even infected, and it isn't even it's just not practical to punish adults who actually have no symptoms. And so then this is why other diseases that are out there that can be spread by people without symptoms, such as influenza, influenza is lethal. When was the last time that we put somebody into a lockdown? When was the last time we mandated a flu vaccine there? Genital herpes, you don't know if you have it, and then you can spread it, and it can be lethal. Should we mandate that everybody has a genital herpes or hepatitis C, right? If those things are met with policies like voluntary vaccination drives, screening protocols for sexually transmitted disease. They have clean needle exchange programs for IV drug users there. But the vaccine mandates as they stand, they can't end the spread of the virus as their effectiveness declines, and all these new variants emerge. So how can they be a sensible? How can what we have, these mandates, be a sensible policy? Is it sensible to consign tens of millions of people to an indeterminate number of boosters and the threat of job loss if it isn't even clear that the doses will stop the spread either, right? So please, people, I'm just going to ask you to stop the conspiracy theories and let's actually, for once, follow the science. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about 15 studies that will show you how natural immunity that you get after recovering from COVID-19 is far superior and more long-lasting than what you get from the COVID shot. We're gonna go in and we're gonna have this honest discussion about the COVID shots, what they're not like, how they're not like the other shots that you grew up with. And if you got measles, then you created antibodies. And if you're trying to get into school in California, all you have to do is take an antibody test, and you don't have to get the shot. But with the COVID shot, you don't get the antibodies to SARS-CoV-2, right? You might get antibodies to the spike protein, we know, but everyone who has read the research and has not formed their opinion based on the nightly news, that know that the shots don't prevent infection or spread the virus. And COVID jabbed individuals, they carry the same, when you have that, the vid juice, right? They carry the same viral load as people when asymptomatic as unvaccinated people do anyways. And in fact, in California, like I was talking about with the measles, if you have the measles, you find out you have antibodies, then you don't have to get the shot. So why aren't we testing people to see if they actually that have already had COVID to see if they have antibodies, and why that actually has been shown to have better immunity than the shot? Why are we making those people actually have the shot? Those are the questions that I'm asking. So the discussion for today is that people that have had COVID, are they a public health threat and must they vaccinate, right? Are people who have been vaccinated helping their fellow man by stopping the spread? I mean, based on the science, it's appropriate that vaccine passports, is it appropriate that vaccine passports would be used to identify and separate public health threats from those who are actually deemed safe to be around? So while our whole government's going into full steam with plans for these vaccine passports, one key thing has occurred that has blown like this irreparable hole in the whole argument. And that is more than 15 studies now show that natural immunity you get after recovering from COVID-19 is far superior. It's longer lasting than what you get from the COVID shot. I mean, common sense and medical science should be used as it has been used since the first virus was seen in 1886. What has gone missing with this latest effort is to force a mandates vaccine is common sense, right? Why should we be concerned about vaccine mandates? Well, people with natural immunity have an increased risk of adverse reactions to the COVID-19 shot. According to one study, up to 4.4 times the risk of having clinically significant side effects. That's not 4 times, that's not 40 times, that's 440 times more likely, right? 4.4% more likely to have a reaction. And why does this concern me is that this requirement not only violates due process rights and the right to refusal of unwanted medical treatment, but it's not compliant with the emergency use authorization, because according to the Mayo Clinic, as of July 21st, Pfizer's COVID vaccine injection was only 42% effective against infection. Remember, they said they wouldn't even bring a vaccine to market if it was less than 50% effective, which that doesn't even meet the FDA administration's requirement of 50% effectiveness for vaccines. Oh, but let us remember the 95% effectiveness that Pfizer told us about, right? Don't talk about the thousands of other people in the study where they had 30,000 plus people in the study, and only 170 of them were symptomatic. Think about that. And they were symptomatic, but they didn't test them. Why? Because it wasn't necessary, because you have to believe the science. If you don't, you're a conspiracy theorist. What they did is they had 30,000 plus people in the study, 170 tested positive, like 95% of those people had been unvaccinated. But what they didn't tell you is they didn't test the other 3,000 people that actually were symptomatic that they didn't even test. They got their numbers. Once they got their numbers, they got their statistic, their 95% statistic, and then they were good to go to be able to vaccinate hundreds of millions and billions of people around the world. Look, I'm just thinking aloud. Don't you think it is a good idea to ask questions? So in a short time, when our Constitution is actually like interpreted differently by both parties, which it's not even both parties now, it's just like Trump or no Trump, right? This has nothing to do with science or the Constitution. If you go back 5 years ago, almost every single citizen would say that vaccine passports are immoral. If you were to ask a Democrat, if you ask a Libertarian, if you ask a Republican, a Conservative, a Green Party, every single person would say vaccine passports were immoral and unconstitutional in and of themselves. So my friends, let's put politics aside, and like Dr. Fauci said, when he stated attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science. Well, Dr. Fauci, I'm sorry, medical science is also proving your vaccines are useless and irrational. And what if I were to tell you that there are at least 15 studies that show natural immunity from previous infection is more, like I said, more robust, longer lasting than what you get from the COVID shot? How many studies would it take? Would it take 20 studies, 40 studies, 60 studies, 80 studies, 100 studies, 1,000 studies, right? Well, they don't have 1,000 studies or 20 studies that actually show that the shot's effective, but we're going with the least amount of science out there, the newest, like just basic data that we're still in a research study. But just look at any textbook on virology or an immunity, not what the papers or your friends have told you. Look, the debate over forced vaccination should be a moot point by now. The CDC, FDA, Fauci, and everyone, including the president, is in agreement there is an ever waning immunity from the vaccine. Maybe not the president. He probably doesn't have a chance to read the science, right? But I want to set the record straight today. I want to summarize for you simply one simple fact. Natural immunity to SARS-CoV-2 is broader, more durable, and longer lasting than any of the other shots on the market. And our policies must reflect that data. Data shows that vaccine immunity, it rapidly wanes regardless of the variants, but especially when a new variant becomes predominant. So I talked about in July that they found that the virus, Mayo, that their effectiveness actually for the Pfizer vaccine went down 14 to 42%. What's interesting is this actually matches the Israeli data, which shows that Pfizer shot went from 95% effectiveness to 64% effectiveness by July 21st. And then at late July, it went down to 39% when the Delta strain became predominant. Pfizer's own trial data also, like they were demonstrating that there was rapidly waning in effectiveness. And Peter Dashi, like he discussed this way back in August, and he said by the 5th month into the trial, efficacy had dropped from 96 to 84%, and this drop it was not due to the emergence of the Delta variant, since 77% of the participants were in the United States, where the Delta variant didn't even exist until months later. So without that predominance of a new variant, effectiveness still dropped off. And that's why the CDC director, Rochelle Walensky, she stated that the vaccine effectiveness against SARS-CoV-2 infection is waning. And the fact that the COVID shots don't prevent infection, that they don't stop the spread of the virus, and the fact that COVID people that have had the shot, individuals that carry the same viral load when symptomatic as unsymptomatic people, and that the whole argument that vaccine passports will identify and separate the public from like health threats is just fails miserably around anyone capable of rational thought and understands that a person with natural immunity from previous infection is exponentially safer to be around than someone who has had the vaccine but not prior infection. As for the unvaccinated who don't have natural immunity from prior infection, well, their status poses no increased risk to anyone but themselves. Conversely, since the COVID shot cannot prevent infection or transmission and only promises to reduce your risk of serious illness, the only one who can benefit from the shot is the one who got it, right? That you're the only person that benefits from the shot. It's like when you think that you're being altruistic, no, you're just being selfish. It's all about you. You're the only one that benefits from the shot. It protects no one else. And in fact, it may actually pose an increased risk to others, because if your symptoms are mild and non-existent, but your viral load is high and you're likely to walk around as usual rather than staying home because you suspect you're infected and infectious, you're out there spreading the virus around to others that are vaccinated and unvaccinated alike. So what does the research say? So let's settle the debate about whether people who have had COVID are now immune and whether that immunity is compatible with that of the COVID shot. And here's a select handful of the studies, right? So Journal Immunity in May, the New York researchers, they concluded that while both SARS-CoV-2 infection and vaccination, they elicit potent immune responses, the immunity you get when you've recovered from infection is more durable and quicker to respond. And this is because you have what? Natural immunity, and it conveys more immunity involving T cells and antibodies. We talked about this in one of our last videos about your immune system, whereas vaccine immunity, it primarily stimulates your adaptive immunity and just involving antibodies. Okay, how about one of the most prestigious journals, actually probably the top science journal in the world if we're going to follow the science, and this is back in May. So this journal, they literally dispelled the fear that SARS-CoV-2 infection might not produce long-lasting immunity, even in people with mild COVID infection, meaning that they didn't even know that they had it, whose they checked their anti-SARS-CoV-2 spike protein levels, antibodies, and they thought that they might rapidly decline in the months post-recovery. But what they found is that they actually had persistent, long-lived bone marrow plasma cells that just start churning out new antibodies when the virus is encountered a second time. You don't need to get a booster because your body makes its own booster. And so according to the authors, overall, the results indicated that mild infection with the SARS-CoV-2, it gives you robust antigen-specific, long-living humoral immunity in humans. Okay? You don't need a booster if you already have the antibodies that your body created naturally. There are no shortcuts in health. And so then nature, again, in July of this year. They found that their findings support that findings that were from Singapore in July of 2020, which found that patients who had recovered from SARS in the 2002-2003, right, they still had robust immunity against SARS-CoV-2 17 years later. So when you're talking about, we didn't even know about SARS-CoV-2, but your body knew how to protect you from it 17 years ago if you had SARS, 2002, 2003. Cell medicine, July of this year. And here's where they found that most previously infected patients produced durable antibodies, memory cells, along with the durable polyfunctional CD4, CD8 T cells that target multiple parts of the virus. So their authors said that when we look at these results, they found that I'm paraphrasing, but they suggest that they had this broad, effective immunity that may persist for how long? Long-term, and who? Recovered COVID-19 patients. It has nothing to do with the vaccine. The same clearly can't be said for vaccine-induced immunity, is what they said. In July, also, like in BioRx, they're echoing that cell medicine finding, where University of California researchers, I wish the governor would actually listen to his own UC California researchers, and they had an article that concluded that natural infection induced expansion of these larger C8 T cells, clones, they actually occupy distinct clusters, likely due to this recognition of a lot of parts on, or what they called epitopes, presented by the virus, not seen in the mRNA vaccine. So it's like when you eat an apple, you can break it down into the vitamins and minerals, but it's all the parts of the apple that give you true health, not just the vitamins and the minerals of the apple, right? It's that bioavailability. And so your body sees the whole virus and creates an antibody to the whole virus, rather than man saying, oh, let's just make one for the spike protein, and that's why we're in the place we're in. So what they basically said is that because of this, we're creating a pandemic of the vaccinated, because if natural immunity is better than vaccine-induced antibodies, you'd expect to see fewer reinfections among those who had already had the COVID-19, right? Compared to the breakthrough infections that are occurring in those people that actually got the shot. They don't see reinfections really in people that have already had COVID-19, and that's precisely what they saw. So this is a preprint article, but they're titled Necessity of COVID-19 Vaccination in Previously Infected Individuals. But they looked at the reinfection rates among these previously infected healthcare workers of the Cleveland Clinic system. And of the 1,359 frontline workers, God bless them, with natural immunity from previous infection, ready? Not a single one was reinfected 10 months into the pandemic. How many? Not a single one was reinfected 10 months into the pandemic, despite constant and heavy exposure to the COVID-19 positive patients. There was a second preprint that was in August of this year. Bet you didn't hear that on the news, where they compared COVID-19 natural immunity to vaccine-induced immunity by looking at reinfection and breakthrough rates. And there were four outcomes were evaluated, okay? So they looked at people that had had the infection, people that had, but did, and then they also looked at people that had symptomatic disease. And they looked at people that had COVID-related hospitalization, and they also looked at death. And results showed, get this, compared to those with natural immunity, SARS-CoV-2 naive, like people that had never had it and had received both doses of the Pfizer shot, had a 5.96, but 6 times increased risk for a breakthrough infection. So if you had it, compared to somebody that had never had it and got the virus, the person that had their shot was 6 times more likely to actually have a breakthrough infection. 6 times. I don't know if you heard that on the news. I don't know if Biden was talking about that on the science there. They also found that there was a 7 times increased risk of symptomatic disease if you had never had it and you got your shots. They found that there was a 13 times increased risk for breakthrough infection with the Delta variant, and a higher risk for COVID-19 related hospitalizations if you had the shot as opposed to somebody that got naturally occurring immunity, and whether they knew that they actually had the virus or not. Remember those asymptomatic carriers that everybody was afraid of earlier? I guess who's laughing now, right? So after adjusting for those comorbidities and the people that had never had it, but had received the two Pfizer vaccines, the people that never had it were, I mean, I'm sorry, the people that had the vaccines that had never had it overall were 27 times more likely to experience symptomatic breakthrough infection than those with a natural immunity. No, I mean, that just boggles my mind. 27 times. I think the thing that's important is that the study demonstrated that natural immunity confers longer lasting and stronger protection against symptomatic disease, right? Against infection, symptomatic disease, hospitalization, especially against that Delta variant. And guess what? Delta is not the last one that's coming out there compared to people that have been vaccinated. So for all those people that look down their nose on people that haven't been vaccinated, I think you actually need to look at the science that's coming out right now, and know that you've been lied to. You can make statistics say what you want them to say. You can change the data to make it look at what you want to look at. And there's a often repeated refrain that we're in this pandemic of the unvaccinated, right? It's all the unvaccinated people who it's their fault. Well, guess what happened? We had an 80% reduction in the number of deaths and hospitalizations by the time only 5% of our population was actually had received the vaccine. So was it 5% that dropped us 80%, or was this already reducing itself? And did we create a secondary problem with all of our policies that we put into place? So I think basically what they're saying is that people that didn't get that don't get that didn't get the use. Hold on. Let me go back there. Should have turned that off there. But they basically, the people that they're saying that the bulk of people that are dying are from the Delta variant are actually the unvaccinated. However, we're actually seeing this major shift in hospitalization rates from unvaccinated to those who've actually gotten the two injections. For example, in Israel, which is about 4 months ahead of where we are, the fully vaccinated make up a bulk of the serious cases and COVID-related deaths. And so by mid-August, about 60% of those who had received their two COVID shots were the ones of the people that were in the hospital. And data from the England shows this similar threat among those over the age of 50. In this age group, partially and fully vaccinated people accounted for almost 70% of hospitalizations. It was actually like 68%, but they accounted for 70% of the COVID deaths. It wasn't a pandemic. It was the deaths weren't coming from the unvaccinated. They were actually coming from the vaccinated. 70% of the people that were dying were already vaccinated there. And data from the US, the CDC, if you still believe anything they say, it also refutes that with the storyline as the pandemic of the unvaccinated narrative. Because between July of this year, July 6th and July 25th, there were 469 COVID cases identified in this one county in Massachusetts. And of those who tested positive, 74%, once again, do you see that magic number, had already received their COVID vaccines, and they were fully vaccinated despite using all the different diagnostic standards. Because you know that there's a different, if you've had your vaccine versus have not had a vaccine, there's actually a different diagnostic standard for you. The test is actually different. It's less sensitive if you've been vaccinated as opposed to if you're not. Guess what? Probably won't find as many breakthrough infections if you test people. We're testing people with apples and oranges. It's not the same test. I thought we were working on science. But what they found was that 80% of those people, of the COVID-related hospitalizations, were also in the vaccinated group. So I think the thing that the authors claim that individuals that were both previously infected with SARS and COVID-2 and given a single dose of the vaccine, they gained some additional protection against the Delta variant, but in the body of the article, they admit they just couldn't demonstrate any significance. So it was their opinion, their science was the opinion. We think that it gave them some help, but we really couldn't find any evidence in this study here. So I think unless the significance is demonstrated, then the finding is basically irrelevant, right? So I wouldn't rely on this paper if I wanted to argue for vaccination of those with pre-existing natural immunity. Besides, there's research showing that COVID shots actually harm the superior T cell immunity built up from prior infection. So you've already had COVID and you get vaccinated, you're actually, some of the studies that are coming out, they're actually showing that you're actually destroying your natural immunity, which is actually superior to the vaccine induced immunity. So immunologists from Mount Sinai and New York and La Paz and Madrid, they actually have raised a lot of serious questions, and they had this discovery after monitoring a group of vaccinated people, both with and without prior infection. And then they found that individuals with pre-existing immunity against SARS-CoV-2, the second vaccine dose not only failed to boost humoral immunity, but determines they got this contraction of the spike-specific T cell response. So literally, your immunity contracted if you'd already had an infection and got one dose. So they also know that other research has shown that the second vaccination dose appears to exert a detrimental effect and like the overall spike-specific humoral response in COVID-19 recovered individuals. So what does this mean? Making sure that this is on good. Harvard, there was a Dr. Kuldorf, I think his name was, and he actually had research that showed that natural immunity offers exponentially more protection. I don't know why that it's about fear right now. Why couldn't we talk about your potential rather than fear? Because fear sells, like you don't, when you have potential and you have immunity, you can't patent immunity, right? They found that it offers exponentially more protection than vaccines, which means that vaccine passports, they're actually unscientific, and they're discriminating against people that have already had COVID, right? They're discriminating because they disproportionately also affect people that are working class individuals. So if you've had prior COVID disease, what I want you to know is it provides better immunity than vaccines. So vaccine mandates are, like I said, are only scientific nonsense. They're also discriminatory, and they're medically unethical. And vaccine passports, they would be immoral and a massive government overreach, even in these, even in the absence of these findings. But with these findings, it's even more of a magnitude of government overreach. I mean, there's simply no historical parallel for a government attempting to restrict the movements of healthy people over a respiratory virus in this manner. Yet the justification for vaccine passports becomes something just not wrong, but absurd in light of these new revelations. So people who've had COVID actually have significantly more protection from the virus than people who have been vaccinated. That's just the short of it. Meanwhile, people who have not had COVID and choose not to get vaccinated may or may not be making an unwise decision. But if they are, they're principally putting only themselves at risk. So this is Dr. Osborne. I just wanted to check in with you. This is, Who's Protecting Your Health on Friday. I just want you to remember that you are brilliant. You are powerful. Your body was designed to heal. It's not designed to be afraid of a virus. And I want you to be a critical thinker. I don't want you to just follow what they say. And when they say one thing, look at the opposite. Maybe just look at the opposite. Say, if they say we need to do this, ask the question, why would they say that? And why wouldn't they say to do this? If they say natural immunity that has been with man for millions of years, right? It doesn't work anymore. And what man has done for a year is actually far superior to that. If that makes sense to you, go ahead and do it. But look, there's one thing. Let's focus on the strength of the host and not the strength of the virus. Look, we have an immunity class coming up. It's a master class that's going to be coming up next month. I want to invite you to it, because what I want to do is I want to make sure that you have faith over fear. So, hey, this is Dr. Osborne. I will see you on Mindset Monday. I'd love to hear your comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you can do me a favor, if this was valuable information, if you could just share it, so we can get that message out, we can get the word out, and we can get people starting to think again. Have a great day.